Kia ora and welcome to Cultured Conversations. I'm Kirsten Paisley, Director, Auckland Art Gallery Toi, Tāmaki. We've put together a series of conversations to talk about the issues facing arts and culture in Aotearoa New Zealand and the world today. Today's conversation, we're going to dip into arts leadership in a COVID environment. And I'm joined by CEO, Regional Facilities Auckland RFA, Chris Brooks. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Kirsten. Nice to be here.
Yeah. Now, Chris, RFA is not a consumer brand, and a lot of people wouldn't know what it is and what it stands for, yet it encapsulates so much. You've got the Art Gallery, which I'm involved with, a leading institution in New Zealand. You've also got conservation and the development and growth of a modern conservation zoo. The Maritime Museum, so critical to how we see ourselves in New Zealand, being seafaring people. And then major events and stadiums and huge sporting celebrations. And it's a sporting nation, of course. So why does that all work and come together in your view?
Well, I think it's interesting in how sort of RFA came together, and I think, as you probably know since joining the organisation, we've never really used the name Regional Facilities Auckland. We actually rely on the strength of our 6 brands, whether it's the Art Gallery, the stadiums and those sorts of things. And they are really the important things in terms of what RFA is about. To me, they're all the things that create the culture of the city. And I think that's one of the things that we do as an organisation is, and you will have seen some of that since you've been here, sort of the experiences we bring, the exhibitions we bring, the events we bring. And to me, that's how they all fit under the cultural banner, because to me, we're an organisation that's very much about creating and building on the social capital of the city and the feel-good factor. And I think if you look around the world, and we've seen that where we've both come from, Melbourne and those sorts of places, bringing all those things together really builds on the culture of a city, and I think that's what RFA does with our brands, and it enables the culture of the city to sort of be created and people to actually have something to really go to see, to live in a city, and it makes the city far more livable, and that I think it's really, it's really interesting. You can build a lot of roads, you can build a lot of infrastructure and those sorts of things, but if there's nothing for people to do, you actually don't have a culture. That's
right. And there's some pretty big numbers when you look at what RFA achieves in a year. Take us through some of that.
Yeah, look, we have around about 3.5 million people through our venues on an annual basis. We run about 2,500 events. As you know, the Art Gallery takes in 400,000 to 500,000 people, and depending on the exhibitions it has. We have about 750,000 people through the zoo. And I think that the part of that is it's just bringing people in and just to see what's there. And as I was sort of mentioning earlier, the fact that you can have all these venues, but it's what's inside them that's really important. We've got a world-class architectural art gallery, but it's what you put in it on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that really makes the art gallery what it is.
Absolutely, yeah. And Chris, you've had quite a diverse career. I mean, here you are leading the biggest cultural entity in the biggest city in New Zealand, but in fact you've got a background in finance, economic development and a whole range of other areas over the Tasman. Take us through a bit of what brought you here and where you've come from.
Look, it's interesting. If I'd ever planned my career, I'd never thought I'd be here. I started life in chartered accountancy, and I guess the more I sort of got going in that field, the commercial area sort of started to entertain me a piece. I worked in the dairy sector for a while. I worked in transport and shipping. And then I spent some time in the energy sector, which I found really fascinating, as sort of the world changes from sort of fossil fuels through to renewables and those sorts of things. And also as part of that, I spent some time in banking, and so I've sort of covered the whole spectrum.
There's not many left. Yeah.
And look, and somewhere out of the blue, I started to take an interest in sort of the arts, the culture, and those sorts of things, and ended up running Federation Square, which was just a fantastic venue to be part of, and that became a real meeting place for the people of Melbourne, sort of attracting 10 million people a year. fortunate to have parts of the National Gallery of Victoria there and the Australian Centre for Moving Image, and it just really became a hub for the city, and it demonstrated to me just how important those sorts of meeting places and activities around them are to a community. And to see that square full, you know, whether it was on a sporting venue or a cultural venue, those sorts of things, it was just fantastic. And just to see the buzz of the people and what they did. And then of course the opportunity came up here up in Auckland, and I suppose the one thing I liked about the RFA model, it actually had some scale, and I think with a lot of our single sort of cultural institutions, they struggle for scale, and it's a battle each year for funding, it's a battle each year to get any capital works done and those sorts of things, and the RFA model actually gives us that scale, and you know, with the support of the council, we've been able to build a really successful model, you know, invest in our infrastructure, bring appropriate exhibitions and programs in, and I think that's been really delightful in terms of the value to the community, and it enables us to have an organisation that we can look at different parts of it and say that we want to put some focus on the gallery, we want to put some focus on the zoo, and what's the best outcome for the community in terms of dealing with those sorts of things, and where can we add the most value.
Chris, you touched on funding then. Have we got it right? Because it strikes me that Auckland is the cultural capital in some respects of Aotearoa, and yet we don't really have central government support for national institutions in Auckland. Have we got it right? And is the conversation with central government and the local council here going to shift in a post-COVID environment, do you think?
Look, I think we've still got a lot more work to do, because, I mean, clearly Auckland is by far the biggest city. It's the economic driver of New Zealand. I would say it's the cultural capital of New Zealand, but we still haven't quite got the mix of activities right. Clearly we've got the most outstanding collection of art in New Zealand here with the Art Gallery. We do have the National Maritime Museum, but I think also it's important to think what Auckland's going to look like in you know, next 20, 30 years, of, you know, say 2050, with more people in the city. And so what does a truly international city look like in 2050? What are the things that when people come to Auckland will mean they will stay in Auckland, so that they don't just arrive at the airport and head off to other parts of the country? You know, what's the stickiness factor in terms of keeping people here? And I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done with central government, which will help New Zealand overall, but also can, you know, enable the contribution that can occur here in Auckland to be even greater.
We're facing some huge changes in our community demographics as well, aren't we? And so I know from our conversations in the leadership team of RFA that there's a real drive to see a further democratisation of our audiences and more deeply engage, particularly with our Pacifica and Maori communities, which are growing exponentially and anticipated to continue to do so. What are your hopes there in terms of, you know, when you're talking about tourism, but we've also got, you know, a captive audience here wanting to participate and engage and showcase? How do we bring all of that together?
Well, I think, you know, we are a bicultural country, but we're a multicultural city now in terms of where we are. And so I think it's, you know, it's really important that we can build on those new communities that have come to Auckland, and we can actually build in terms of the types of activities that we do with them. I mean, one of the things that we used to do regularly at Fed Square was have different cultural days in terms of that, whether a Korean day, a Chinese day, absolutely really great things to have. Build the community, start for the new members of the community to understand the history of the country they're coming to and those sorts of things. And I think making sure we've got an inclusive community is really, really important in terms of where we are.
Oh, that's right. I mean, thinking a little bit about what we've just come through, so nearly 3 months of lockdown and Skype meetings, back to back, dawn to dusk. We've seen a lot of each other on screen, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
But one of the enduring memories that I have is seeing people in Milan on their balconies singing at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. A community of urban dwellers confined who fortunately have balconies, you know, because many people living in urban environments are without. But it was a moment where, through vocal ensemble, spontaneous vocal ensemble, people were able to express a sense of solidarity, of shared experience. And it's made me reflect quite deeply about the work we do in the gallery and the use of public spaces for bringing people together. And thinking about Auckland and what we're going through now. So we've got businesses open, people are coming back into town, but we know that there's a huge economic impact. University students aren't back yet, and so on. How do you see arts practitioners and cultural activity leading the social recovery that the city needs now?
I think you were saying about, yes, we've got to know each other very well in the screen, and I think most of us spent every day sort of in the screen for many hours. But I also thought during that period we did some really amazing things for the community from an arts perspective. I mean, you think of the work that you did at the gallery and the amount of information we got out via social media and those sorts of things. And the zoo did an amazing job around that as well. Just to try and I think I guess part of our role from my perspective is also, even though we don't have a lot of funding to do those things, there is a role to actually get information out to the community about the value of the arts. You know, the collections that we've got, the collections that you've got online now at the gallery, you know, the activities of the animals at the zoo, they're really important things in terms of giving people something to think about and take away sort of the views about, you know, what's happening with COVID and those sorts of things. I mean, I think it's interesting, as I think we've talked before about the fact that you know, people see arts, culture and art galleries particularly as very safe environments, and they give them confidence about the future. And I think that's something that we've got to, you know, learn to build on. And I suppose, you know, since you've reopened again, just to start to see the energy, the smiles on people's faces, you know, the hope factor that's there in terms of coming into the gallery, seeing these things, just starting to think that life is getting back to somewhere near normal is really important. And I think that's something that we've got to continue to build on. And it would also be good, you know, to get our sort of political leaders to understand, I think, a bit more in terms of the value of those sorts of things and just regenerating the culture of the city and regenerating the growth of the country in terms of that, because we are going to have a pretty tough economic recovery, and you know, arts particularly I think can play a key role in just not just using our buildings and venues as that, but getting people out into the community to sort of show the great things that can happen.
One of the roles of our organisations within the RFA family is to bring the world to New Zealanders, and particularly when not everyone can travel. Well, now no one can travel. But in fact, bringing artists and international performers and international exhibitions into the city is very difficult, if not impossible right now. And we're imagining the horizon line of, you know, when our border's going to relax and when are we going to be able to recommence. But is it going to be the same, Chris? Are there in fact going to be, well, I tend to wonder whether there might in fact be bigger changes about how we work as cultural institutions going forward because of what we've achieved in fact during this closure period.
I mean, I think we all, I don't know whether we accept, but I think we probably understand that as we come out of this, it's going to be very different to where we were in sort of the first 2 months of this year, and what was normal is going to be something quite different in terms of what it is. So I mean, I actually think there's going to be a greater opportunity on local content. There's going to be a greater opportunity for local audience. People will probably travel more within their own country, or a close country and those sorts of things. Because I think it'll take some time to get back to where people are just very happy to go back to the environment that they were before, because, you know, there'll still be a long period, I think, for that recovery. So people are going to be a lot more confident about sort of living in their own bubble, as we call it, and that bubble could get expanded. And then just doing the things that are important to them. So again, what we can create, and I mean, we've got some outstanding cultural venues, assets here that we can actually build on and generate a real lot of activity for our community, which I think is a really key part in terms of what we do.
Well, that trans-Tasman bubble we're all watching quite closely, aren't we? Not only to get home to loved ones, but also because there's great cultural content on both sides of the Tasman that, and you know, more collegiality and sharing could be taking place as a result of this. But with all of these changes, it calls for a different kind of leadership, really, and it's a different kind of leadership challenge that we've been through. I just wonder if we might reflect a little bit on that. What are the arts leadership qualities that we are seeing thriving through these kind of uncertain times when we need to pivot, sometimes hourly, in direction in our program and activity?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, as you know, we're sitting down on sort of the 22nd of March, and then all of a sudden the next day everything is shut. And you were in the middle of doing some installation work at the gallery, and I think worked very late that night to keep the team going to at least get some initial work done. And look, and since then, I think, you know, as leaders, and I know I've found it, that we're faced with very different challenges. I mean, first of all, we had all our people in different environments operating in different ways. We haven't been able to bring all our people back successfully together at this point in time right across the organisation. So I think we are actually going to be presenting in a lot different way to what we did before, and I think people's expectations are going to be quite different in terms of what they expect. So again, I think as leaders, it's going to be up to us to sort of generate new ways to sort of show our exhibitions, show our art, those sorts of things. And you know, there'll be far more digital content than I think we've talked about. There'll be far more content that we can sort of, you know, send across the country than we've previously done, because I think that's going to be our role, to try and lift the spirits of the community that way.
And perhaps even some opportunity for partnership with airlines to solve some of the problems that we have in the cultural space, like or in the galleries world. In order to bring a major international exhibition into the city, the country, we require courier travel, which of course is hugely limiting due to quarantine requirements. So could an airline potentially solve that? And similarly for a performing arts, a dance group or theatre group wanting to come present a musical here, maybe there'll be new ways of solving these issues through corporate public partnership.
Yeah, I mean, I think the historical ways they have happened will change. And they'll have to change, because otherwise what we've traditionally done in bringing exhibitions and those sorts of things in is not going to occur the same way as it did. And if it does, it's going to be some years down the track before that happens. So I think all those things around logistics and supply chains and all that are going to be quite different. And even, you know, I think perhaps a return to local manufacturing in a number of areas as well, which we've all been down this path of seeing manufacturing going offshore everywhere to all different parts of the world. You can see more of those local opportunities coming back here.
Yeah. And the voice of artists in all of this. I mean, I think the thing about artists right across the spectrum of performing visual arts, moving image, literary arts, is that they provide ways in which we can kind of understand what we're experiencing, the discombobulation of so much change at once happening all over the world in different ways. And certainly COVID's demonstrated that while it's bipartisan in its approach and impact, it's also impacted people very differently based on where they live, first world, third world nations, and all of the conditions that go around the health and the social health of a people. And through all of that, and everything we're seeing abroad and here as well, and personally experiencing in our own lives, the voice of an artist is one that provides a pathway, right? Yeah. So thinking about that logistically as a cultural leader, with an ever decreasing budget to be working with, what's really struck me as being a critical question is, where is every dollar going? Because where you place your dollar, of course, has a flow-on impact to what can be created. So at the gallery, what we've been thinking about more and more is making sure our investment in the arts actually goes to artists who are given platform and voice to speak and to share their thoughts about how to move through these challenging times.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I mean, the power of the voice, the power of activity is just so important for these future steps. And I think we'll probably find that even though our funds are limited, that the more that we can spread those funds across local artists, the better outcomes we'll probably get. You know, we've possibly moved away from sort of some of the bigger events now to, as you say, making sure that we maximise the value of the dollar that we use, and to get the best output in that from a community perspective. But it's going to be quite challenging around that. Hopefully it'll encourage a lot more development in the sector. You know, it's whether that's with the arts, whether it's in opera, whether it's in ballet and those sorts of things. There's a good opportunity, I think, for all those sorts of things, and for there to be a greater level of community involvement than we've probably had before. And
access and collaboration, right? Yeah. Because we need to be able to provide our facilities to makers and doers and performers right now, perhaps more than ever, to be able to give platform to those voices. I mean,
I think we certainly accept as an organisation, and you know, we've talked about it, the fact that, you know, we've got some great venues. It's just how we open those venues up wider to you know, for access for people for exactly the sort of things we've just been talking about.
And just in winding up then, Chris, you know, taking us a bit beyond this current moment, thinking to the future of Auckland and where it's going, what are your enduring hopes for the city's arts and culture?
Well, I think for me, I would really like the city to be known greater for its level of arts and culture. I think it's got some really great things at the moment, both from an infrastructure perspective and from a content perspective. But I think there's a lot more that we can do in terms of making the quality of that activity known, just not to our own community, but to the people of New Zealand. I mean, I think we've looked at this city, and it's going through a significant growth phase. You know, and it'll do that for a number of years yet. And I think if I was, you know, to be here sitting in this chair in 10 years' time, the main thing that I would like to see this city be is sort of the leading sort of arts culture city, you know, in the Asia Pacific in terms of what it does. And I think that's an ambition we should set ourselves. And as part of that, sort of identify, you know, what other components do we need? You know, we've talked of different types of galleries, we've talked of science activities and those sorts of things. I think they are really important if we're going to be a leading cultural city in this region. And
I mean, when we talk about culture, we're often talking about a slightly expanded version of the arts, but I think when you're using it now, you're talking about something a bit broader and bigger than that, aren't you?
Look, I use the word culture to cover everything in the arts, sport, activities at the zoo, conservation, those sorts of things, because I think all those things build on the culture of the city. And I think that's the really important part of what we do. It's, as I said earlier, it's the feel good factor. It's why people want to get out in their city on a daily basis, and it really is what makes the city work.
And what makes us understand who we are as humans, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's all aspects of how we understand and express ourselves in the world today, and that can take form in a wide variety of different activity and expressions.
And I think that's exactly right. And it's how people feel what they're doing is helping the culture of the family, helping the culture of the city, right that way through.
Thanks so much for joining me today, Chris.
Thanks, Kirsten. It's great to be here. As you know, culture is such an important part of our city, and it means so much to me to be able to make a contribution towards it.
You've been listening to Cultured Conversations. My name's Kirsten Paisley, Director, Toi Tāmaki, Auckland Art Gallery. You can find out more online at aucklandartgallery.com or join the conversation using #CulturedConversations.